All right, welcome back everybody for our last workshop of the day. Please stick around after Ken Dahlgren's presentation because we do have some closing remarks from the Chautauqua County Department of Mental Hygiene. But I'm going to pass it over to Alex Rodriguez to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you very much. Our speaker for this fifth session is Kenneth Dahlgren, a Master of Public Health and Science and Education, and he is the Outreach Coordinator with Tobacco Free CCA. Ken provides 20 years experience in tobacco control outreach and advocacy and is an experienced conference speaker. I'm going to turn it over to him for his presentation, Vaping and Nicotine Addiction. Ken, take it away.
And here we go. Started. Oh, here we are. Play from start. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. This obviously is a topic that, in terms of tobacco control, is really kind of new. I mean, nicotine addiction has always been there, but with the addition of vaping, it's definitely changed things in a lot of different ways. And this is an area that's changing rather rapidly. As we'll see at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about some of the things that have occurred over the last year that has changed the landscape around vaping and around youth access. So we'll talk about a little bit about the tobacco industry at the beginning, a little more about nicotine addiction and why it's so important to understand nicotine addiction, and the fact that it is, for many people who struggle with addiction, the very first substance that many, or if not most, become addicted to. One of the things I want to preface this with is the fact that vaping is still controversial in a lot of ways in society, and even amongst tobacco control specialists and folks in prevention and folks in treatment. There's strong feelings about the issue. There's a lot of people that believe that it can be helpful in helping folks that are addicted to conventional tobacco to be used as a cessation device. Unfortunately, it's just, we don't have the evidence yet to really confirm that, and it is not an approved cessation device at this point. But instead, we need to focus on nicotine itself and on addiction, and especially how nicotine affects young people and the access that young people have to nicotine that's unprecedented because of vaping. So we start with the tobacco industry. It always goes back to the tobacco industry. We've had a variety of various tobacco companies in our country for years, through mergers and buyouts and splits and then mergers again. We're really down to two main players, and that's British American Tobacco, who owns R.J. Reynolds and Lorillard and Brown and Williamson, some of the older American brands. And then we have Altria, who's the parent company of Philip Morris USA, who also split off Philip Morris International due to trying to protect themselves from some lawsuits. And you can see the popular cigarette brands for both British American Tobacco and Altria. They both have some very strong brands. You've got Camel and Cool and Winston and Lucky Strike and Newport on one side, and you've got Marlboro and Parliament and Virginia Slims. And Marlboro, to this day, is still probably the most successful brand of tobacco in the world. But then you notice at the bottom, they've branched out. And British American Tobacco has Vuse and Blue, which have been widely advertised. And then Altria, Philip Morris had Green Smoke and Mark 10, which they have been kind of phasing out because of their recent purchase of Juul. They now own a third of Juul, who is still at this point, still the largest e-cigarette company out there, though their market share is declining for some reasons that we'll discuss in a few minutes. So this just gives you the overall, landscape of what tobacco products are out there. And as you can see, the tobacco leaf has been used in commercial tobacco in a lot of different ways. This doesn't talk about native use of tobacco, which is a whole other subject. This is about the commercialization of tobacco. And you can see that pretty much any way they could possibly think of as a way of delivering nicotine into the human body, they have tried it. We will concentrate mostly on the e-cigarette side of it today, but I just wanted to give you the overall picture. So what's happening out there? Well, we've definitely got some serious issues. When you look at trends in tobacco product use amongst high school students in New York State, now this is New York State averages. Our statistics here actually are pretty close to this. I think you did see earlier, if you saw some of the earlier presentations, that our actual high school traditional cigarette use is higher than the average state average, and e-cigarettes seem to be very close here in Chautauqua County. But if you look at what happened, I started in tobacco control in the year 2000, right when this map started. And when I started, we were working solely on conventional cigarettes. We weren't even really allowed to spend much time on smokeless tobacco and the other issues. It was only conventional cigarettes. And as you can see then, the high school student rate was 33.6% of students using, cigarettes was 27.1%. And there was 33.6% of students using any kind of tobacco product, but cigarettes were about 27.1. In Chautauqua County, it was actually a little higher. It was over 30. I believe it was around 32% when I first started. So we definitely had some real issues to deal with. And you can see over time, if you follow this, by the time we got to 2014, we were rejoicing because we were under 10% of high school students in New York State using conventional cigarettes. And then it dropped even more, 4.3 in 2016. But then suddenly 2018, we see a little bit of an uptake, and we're still waiting for the 2020 figures, which will probably be delayed even more than normal because of the COVID crisis. But we expect actually to see a little bit of an uptake. I do, at least, for reasons that we're going to discuss. You look at any tobacco use, I mean, we got down to a point in 2014 down to 19.5%, but now look at where we are in 2018. We're right back up almost to where we were 18 years before, because of, look at e-cigarettes. They came on the scene around 2010, but they were just here in the US, but they were just a blip on the radar. They weren't a big, important part of what we were seeing. In fact, in tobacco control, we didn't even talk about e-cigarettes until much later. And you can notice, though, by 2014, the state realized it was enough of an issue that they needed to start tracking it. And that was at a point where more than 10% of high school students in New York State, and this is an average of all high schoolers. This isn't the senior or 12th grade rate. This is the average of high schoolers. We started out at 10%. Look where we ended up by 2018, 27.4%. And I believe some of what we're seeing in our counties in Western New York, we're up over 30% in some cases. So it's just important to recognize the fact that something happened here, and it happened rather suddenly. And that something was, cigarette smoking declined 82% in 18 years, and then started to increase again for the first time in 2016. During the time that 2014, e-cigarettes started appearing on the radar. And now by 2018, we've got nearly 30% of our high school students using e-cigarettes. They are the most commonly used tobacco product amongst youth, far, surpassing cigarettes, cigars, and other products. So obviously we're dealing with a real adolescent epidemic. Why is that a problem? Well, we'll talk about that a little more, but this gives you the national figures, which show the trends for the last, 7 or 8 years at the national level, and look at the red where e-cigarettes. Now, what do we think happened here? E-cigarettes were catching on, and suddenly about 2015, 2016, they started to plummet. They started to go down a little bit. And then what happened around 2016, 2017? That's when Juul was introduced. And we'll talk about what that did to the whole vaping industry and the youth access and youth addiction issues in a couple of minutes. You can see, the downward trend of conventional cigarettes, but again, at the national level, we see a little bit of an uptick happening again. At the national level, we see 8.1%. Smokeless stayed pretty steady. Cigar use, slowly ticked down. Hookah spiked in around 2014, 2015. I was working on college campuses at the time, and we had a lot of uptick in hookah use. And then it started going down, but now we see a bit of an uptick there again. Why do I bring up the US deaths attributable each year to cigarette smoking? I want to bring up a very important point, is when we talk about deaths from conventional cigarette smoking, we often just concentrate on cancers, lung cancer especially. And it's important to understand, yes, cancer death, it's atrocious. It's preventable in many ways. Many cancers can be prevented by there no longer being tobacco on the face of this planet. But it's only, if you take all cancers together, it's only a little over a third of the deaths caused by tobacco, by cigarette smoking. You've got stroke and chronic and COPD and heart disease and issues like that. And so even if, let's posit that that if you vape, you get far less carcinogens. Let's say that's true. We don't know that that's true, but let's pretend that's true, and we know that's true. We get far less carcinogens than we do from conventional smoking. We're only dealing with a third of the issues. We don't know, again, how much vaping impacts these other diseases, COPD, heart disease. More and more evidence is coming out that seems to be showing vaping has very similar effects on the cardiovascular system as conventional cigarette smoking. More is being studied, but I have said right from the beginning, vaping is going to lead to probably more issues around lung and heart issues than we've seen before. Regardless of whether nicotine is delivered through combustible cigarette or an electronic cigarette, this is an important statement from Columbia University, the National Center on Addiction and Drug Abuse. Nicotine remains one of our most addictive and potent gateway drugs. We don't often use that term, but it's very appropriate here. It's associated with the later use of other addictive and dangerous substances. Adequate attention must be paid to preventing the use of all addictive substances, including nicotine, and providing effective treatments that reduce or eliminate harm to those with addiction. So what is it about nicotine? Nicotine is the ingredient in tobacco products that makes them addicted and promotes that continued use of those products. It's nicotine that keeps you coming back. Nicotine use increases the risk of other substance use and addiction. That's something that has been studied to a great degree. And there's a lot of evidence out there showing that it does have a gateway effect. It can increase the risk, especially since oftentimes nicotine is the first addictive substance that the human body is exposed to, that adolescents are using at a young age, at 11, 12 years old. And it's starting to form some changes in their brain. And we'll talk about that a little more. It's a central nervous system stimulant, one of the most highly addictive drugs. It travels quickly to the brain, causing the release of chemicals that can ultimately trigger feelings of reward. Most studies of nicotine effect haven't really examined nicotine in isolation. They've talked about cigarettes and the other things, but they haven't necessarily done a good job of examining just nicotine in isolation. But what we do know about nicotine is by no means is it a harmless drug. It does affect the nervous, cardiovascular, respiratory systems, and it could impair cardiovascular and lung function in and of itself. Nicotine is also associated with things like preterm delivery and stillbirth, exposure during fetal development, and adolescence can have lasting effects on brain and lung development. And nicotine is fatal in the right dose. If you drink nicotine, nicotine is a poison. And we have had some deaths from nicotine poisoning from very young children drinking e-liquid accidentally. And flavors, of course, played into an issue there, which we'll talk about. But nicotine is absorbed, when tobacco is chewed by the lining in the mouth, the cheeks, the lips. But when it's inhaled as tobacco smoke or e-cigarette aerosol, it travels into the deepest parts of the lung, into the smallest branches where it's absorbed into the bloodstream through the linings of the sacs in the lungs. And after it reaches the bloodstream, it reaches the brain in seconds. And that's when those biochemical reactions start happening. And the brain starts saying, oh, wow, something great is happening here. I'm being rewarded. It also acts on the adrenal glands and can release stimulants such as adrenaline. The result is you can have increases in blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration, which can all lead to some of those other issues we talked about. Psychological changes resulting from nicotine and the fast speed in which it reaches the brain and the way it triggers the reward center makes this a highly addictive chemical. I put this up here just to show there have been studies done that show that people who meet the criteria for nicotine addiction, they've been evaluated and they have been found to be addicted to nicotine. And there's different scales for evaluating that, but based on an actual diagnosis of nicotine addiction, for those that are addicted to nicotine, look at the difference. 15.2% alcohol use disorder versus somebody that is not addicted to nicotine, 5.9%. Look at other drug use disorder, 10.9% with nicotine addiction versus 1.9% for those tested without nicotine addiction. And you'll see the box on the right talks about some other things like current marijuana use, 21.4% versus 6.4%. Marijuana use disorder, 5.9% versus 1.2%. Misuse of controlled prescription drugs, 7.9% versus 2%, almost 4 times as likely. And then somebody with a prescription drug disorder, 4.7 versus 0.6. Current use of any drug, 3.6% versus 1%. So obviously something is going on there, and nicotine is like the beginning of the pipeline for many people leading into other forms of addiction. It affects the area of the brain responsible for attention, memory, learning, brain plasticity. Young people are affected. Their brain is developing. Oftentimes, especially for males, up to around the age of 25, 26. For females, sometimes their brain development ends a little bit sooner. I guess they develop faster and they mature faster. But for many folks, those young teen years when they're starting to smoke, or even preteen, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, that's when the brain is doing an awful lot of development. And early exposure to nicotine can reduce brain activity. It can negatively affect concentration and memory, and can cause addiction and can harm the developing brain. And unfortunately, the one part of the brain that develops the fastest is the reward center. So by the time a young person is 13, their reward center is developed pretty well, and they're stimulated by exciting and risky experiences. They're open to these feelings of pleasure that can be provided from, the substances changing, the way the brain works. So it's a double threat in that the area of the brain that develops the soonest is the reward center, but yet the frontal lobe is not developed until much later, and they really can't access reason as well to control their emotions and to manage the stress that they're going through. And face it, we've all heard how stressful adolescence is, and we all, I think, remember how stressful adolescence was. For me, that's a long time ago to remember, but I still kind of have a vague idea. And, nicotine obviously is a real issue when it comes to the developing brain. So where did e-cigarettes come from? What did even happen? We're going to do a little bit of history and kind of follow the development of electronic nicotine delivery systems, e-cigarettes, vaping, whatever you want to call it. There have been so many different names given over the last few years, but it first really introduced from China in 2007. It's something that had been around for a while, but was kind of like reinvented in the early 2000s and came to the US around 2007. It allows users to inhale a nicotine-laced aerosol. It's not water vapor, it's an aerosol, and I think that's important to remember. It really aerosolizes propylene glycol or glycerin that has nicotine and other chemicals in it. The amount of nicotine per inhale can be very variable. There's really very little quality control. The FDA is trying to deal with that in their own somewhat ineffective way, but they're working on it. Local vape shops, have been able to make their own e-juice. We've talked to kids who mix it up in the trunk of their car in the BOCES parking lot. There's a lot of homemade e-juice out there. And users like to say they really don't smoke, they vape. There's a whole vaping subculture. I usually show a video here, I'm not today, that shows like one of these vaping competitions, and it's just insane. It really is quite an event, kind of exciting. Main ingredient in e-juice is either propylene glycol and or glycerin. And then that's mixed with the other flavorings, the nicotine, the additives. A little bit of water might be added to thin it, but from the beginning, they used to say it's just water vapor. There's very little to next to no water in e-juice. And I think that's important for people to recognize. Luckily, the vaping industry corrected that to some degree later when they got called out. And there's other chemicals here you can see. One of the things I like to highlight is the fact that there are heavy metals that can be found, mainly because the vaping device has metal in it that is, slowly oxidized and can be part of the vaping vape or smoke that's smoked in. There could be tin, silver, nickel, iron, all these other things. And then silicate nanoparticles. That's important to remember. When you smoke a traditional tobacco cigarette, not only are there all those chemicals and poisons that we've been taught for so many years, the 3,000 chemicals that can be released, that's significant. But what we are not often taught or talk about is the fact that there's a lot of very tiny nanoparticles, inert particles that are the product of combustion that are inhaled deep into your lungs. And those are the types of small little particles that get deep into your lungs and create issues like emphysema and contribute to COPD and things like that. And we don't often talk about that. Those same silicate nanoparticles are every bit a part of vaping. And that's one reason why I've been able to, very assuredly say from the beginning that vaping is not safe. It can't be safe. When you're inhaling all these tiny particles into your lungs, it has an effect. Even if nothing else, we still have that. This just highlights that a little bit. about volatile organic compounds, flavorings. We're going to talk about flavorings a little more in just a minute. Some cancer-causing chemicals have been identified now, excuse me, in vaping smoke. So how does it work? This is for those of you who aren't familiar with how a vaping device works. This is the very simplified, very first kind of e-cigarette called a cig-alike. This kind of gives you an idea of, where, what happens. It's a very simple thing. There's a battery, and that's like a regular, AA battery, a little microprocessor, a sensor, then the vaporizer, which has a metal coil, which heats up and vaporizes the liquid, which is held in a cartridge, which is, the nicotine dissolved in the propylene glycol. That's a very, very simplified version. This was where vaping started. And to be honest, they weren't all that successful. The first cig-alikes came and people tried them and they thought, yuck, this really isn't all that enjoyable. So, they had to start, making some modifications and some changes. And when we went from cig-alikes to more of the refillable pens, and then in the very center, a mod, which is something that can be custom made. It has a tank system. You can control the amount of electricity. You can control a lot of things. And what they found is a lot of these are used for like the professional vaping competitions and that, where they're trying to get the biggest cloud possible. They have to have a higher heat. Higher the heat, they can have a bigger cloud. And what they found is the higher the heat, the more formaldehyde and some other chemicals come out in the vape. So that can be a little bit more dangerous than vaping at a lower heat. They've even got e-cigars and e-pipes. And this kind of gives you the fact that shows that we've gone through 4 generations really of vape devices. We started with the cig-alike. We went to the pen type system, which could be refillable or a cartridge. Then we went to the tank-like systems, which could be much more customized. And then the 4th generation hit, which were the closed pod systems. And one difference is they use a nicotine salt instead of other form of nicotine. The nicotine salt acts much more like the type of nicotine hit that you get from smoking a traditional cigarette. So suddenly that became very popular. And we're going to talk about that process in a minute. But we do need to mention the role of flavors. Flavors are important as something that the industry realized early on that they needed to do to recruit young people. They can be in cartridges or do-it-yourself refillable bottles. There were cartridges for original e-cigarettes, then refillable liquid that you could use later on for pens and mods. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of flavors. This is actually a very old slide, but it shows a few flavors that are out there, but there are thousands. And the thing that we're finding is one of the scientists at Roswell that analyzes these e-cigarette flavors, pretty much brought up the point is he can analyze strawberry flavor from one company and strawberry flavor from another company, and they're made of a total different cocktail of chemicals from each other. Flavors in e-juice are made by combining other chemicals, sometimes hundreds of chemicals, to make an artificial flavor like cherry or mango or Swedish fish or unicorn's milk or whatever crazy thing somebody's come up with, cinnamon rolls and, whatever. But it's important to remember that it's not just these chemicals that are being vaporized. These chemicals are being vaporized, but when they're vaporized, they turn into other chemicals as well. So they're still testing to see what are all the chemicals that are being given off when these initial chemicals are vaporized. But flavor is important. tobacco companies have had a long history of developing and marketing flavors, starting with menthol. Menthol was like the first flavor that was used to addict and hook many, many folks, and especially even young people, and some minority groups have been targeted by the tobacco industry using menthol. They improve the taste, they reduce the harshness, you make it you don't notice how harsh it's being on your throat. So they're more appealing and easier for beginners. And what's a beginner? A kid. Because a beginner, somebody that starts smoking or using tobacco products, is traditionally a vast majority by the time they're 18 years old. So flavors make for a good transition. I've heard it often said that flavors hook them and nicotine keeps them. And that's really what happens. 81% of kids who ever used tobacco products started with a flavored product. And that includes 81% of kids who ever tried e-cigarettes. They didn't try unflavored e-cigarettes or tobacco flavored e-cigarettes. They started with a flavor. It's important also to mention that vaping can also be used to vape other substances, and you've heard a little bit about that, but other synthetic drugs, THC, heroin, fentanyl, meth, anything that can be diluted into a liquid concentrate can be vaped, and you can find instructions on YouTube how to do it, or somewhere on the net, because I know we've looked them up and we've found the instructions. They can be made to be used even with dry marijuana with herb. Marijuana concentrate can be up to 98% THC. And there are some brands that are sold out there. In fact, the PAX brand was the same company that actually spun off the later Juul product. Kids see e-cigarette advertising. It's increasing more and more. E-cigarette ads reach nearly 80% of US middle and high school kids. So let's talk about what happened to really heat things up, figuratively and realistically. Juul came along. Juul only came along in around 2015. It became available for sale. And by 2017, it was the top selling brand. And by 2019, it had more than half the market. Juul was a flashy little device, often called the iPad or the iPhone of vaping. Kids wanted it. It was nice looking. It was small. It's very concealable. You get liquid refillable pods. They were available in a bunch of flavors. Obviously, that's changing now, and we'll talk about that. But it quickly gathered market share to the point where they got so big that Philip Morris came along and bought 1/3 of the company for billions of dollars. All Juul e-cigarettes have a high level of nicotine. That's one thing that 2/3 of kids who used Juul didn't know. 2/3 of kids who used Juul thought they had no nicotine when surveyed. A single Juul pod contains as much nicotine as a pack of 20 regular cigarettes, actually a little bit more than that. But things started heating up. By 2018, 19, they started to get noticed because, as you can see from the charts, the amount of kids that started using it, and Juul became a target. How Juul hooked kids and ignited a public health crisis. They did. And many parents started to get concerned, and advocacy groups were formed to fight against Juul and to fight against vaping and what it did to their teenagers. This kind of shows you a breakdown of the sleek Juul device in the pods, but it also, these are the national figures, but shows how, 2011, only 2% of high schoolers vaped. By 2019, it was 28%. If not more than that, and actually in our area, more than that. And the percentage of 28% of teen vapors, this is what I think bothers me, because we heard a lot from the vaping industry in the early days. Well, maybe some kids are using vaping products or Juul, but they're doing it very infrequently. They're not doing it often. Well, 28% of teen vapers said they had used a vaping product 20 of the last 30 days, which means, 2 out of every 3 days they're vaping. That's a significant number that are using it on an almost daily basis. It's not as sporadic as what those who are promoting vaping would like us to think. Suddenly we have a problem. Juul comes on the scene, things happen. Suddenly we notice there's some problems happening. EVALI comes along, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you can see by February of 2019, the National Institutes of Health are saying that 37.3% of 12th graders are vaping, 17.6% of 8th graders, 32% of 10th graders. I mean, obviously there was a problem when nearly, getting close to 40% of students in 12th grade reported vaping. And then we suddenly started seeing these strange vaping-related lung illnesses happening. Now, obviously, we haven't heard a lot about that in recent days because obviously we've had another crisis on our minds more, and the way the media likes to focus, I guess, on one crisis at a time. I mean, we definitely have some real crisis, but we still have the EVALI situation still happening. It's just it's not the flavor of the day anymore. So what happened by January, late 2019 and early January, the FDA decided, we think we have a problem. We should do something about it. Now, they've been pressured by many of our organizations for years to deal with the flavor issue, to deal with youth access issues. Well, so now they decided they are going to remove most unauthorized flavored e-cigarettes from the market, but, it applies to, mint, fruit, and dessert flavors, but we're not going to include menthol or tobacco flavored products, especially not menthol, because menthol was carved out before due to tobacco industry lobbying. Also, it would only apply to flavored cartridges, sealed cartridges, not open tank systems. So basically what they did is they created regulations that pretty much applied to Juul, to try to get Juul to basically only be able to market menthol or mint. Well, no, not mint, but menthol and tobacco flavored products. And you could still have open tank systems where people could mix their own stuff. Experts said it may be a good step, but that teens may just switch to menthol flavoring. And studies have started to show that that's really what happens when these fruity flavors and other flavors aren't available. Kids switch to menthol. Now, they acted this way because they were trying to strike a balance between protecting youth from health risks and allowing adult smokers to use e-cigarettes as possibly a way to quit combustible cigarettes. They won't come out and say that it's okay to do it, but they want to protect the adult smokers' rights to do it. So we're not quite sure, how that all fits. But the intent was, to dramatically limit children's access to certain flavored e-cigarette products. Now, this action was a scale back from what we thought was going to happen and what was announced was going to happen. Obviously, somebody got to somebody, and things got backed off a little bit. But immediately, what happens? So the Juul product, because it has replaceable cartridges, is not considered disposable. And disposables were exempt from the FDA ruling. So Puff Bars came out. And pretty much it's a mimic of Juul, but it's disposable. It came in 24 different flavors. I put up a few of them here. And because of the many exemptions and loopholes in the new FDA policy, they were able to sell this product, and it started catching on like wildfire. Now, currently, for the last couple months, the distributors of Puff Bars in the official Puff Bars in the United States have pulled back on their marketing, and they are planning on applying to the FDA for approval to market this product. I think they're going to have a tough go on this, but who knows? The FDA could approve them. But it's not stopping Puff Bar lookalikes and other, because even products that make, the places that make Puff Bar in China are actually making non-branded Puff Bars in the same factories and selling them, you know, to the same specs as these Puff Bars are. I mean, technically they're not supposed to do that, but they are. So they're still out there. So then what happens? You know, we have this, the whole EVALI thing happening, which is e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury. New York State, you know, we've had patients from 14 to 71. 62% of them are under the age of 25 years old. I mean, that's very uncommon for people that young to be presenting with those kind of lung issues. And contrary to the information that was spread widely, is it isn't all due to vitamin E oil and black market THC products. Now, that's a significant portion of what was tested, but they did find that 16% of the products that were tested that were used by the people that ended up with this condition, 16% were people that were just using traditional nicotine-containing products only. So it's important that New York State Department of Health, in their extensive testing, has come out and said no single product or specific chemical has been linked to all cases. Now, there's some heavy evidence that show THC-laced vitamin E liquids and oils are a dangerous thing and probably are a main thing dealing with here, but that's not the only thing that can cause this disease. So what New York State Department of Health came out with was an advisory. New York State Department of Health strongly advises that all New Yorkers stop using e-cigarette and vape products. You know, end of discussion. I mean, that was a pretty bold statement that's their advisory. I did look, and the latest figures I could see by mid-February 2020, about the time we got into the COVID crisis, the CDC had reported more than 2,800 cases of lung injuries requiring hospitalization. Now, that's just the ones requiring hospitalization across all 50 states, and we were up to 68 deaths. And I know there's more than that now. So what happened in New York as a result of that? We ended up, New York had a couple of regulations that were passed over the last couple of years. The first was we had a poisoning happen about 4 or 5 years ago. So laws were passed requiring nicotine to be sold in a child-resistant bottle. Then about 1.5 years or so ago, we had the sale and distribution of e-cigarettes or e-liquid to people under age 21 prohibited, actually about 1 year ago. So e-cigarettes and liquid nicotine was included in our sales laws, you know, officially under Tobacco 21. Now, some of us had already done that. Chautauqua County did that a couple years before that, included, we raised our age to buy tobacco products to 21, and we included e-cigarettes and liquid nicotine. So did Cattaraugus County, as well as several others. Now, what's happened this year in this New York State budget is, as of May 18th, just last week, the end of sale of tobacco products by pharmacies. This is something we've even had pickets and protests here in Jamestown about. I led some on that, 10 years ago or more, 10, 15 years ago, trying to get pharmacies to stop selling tobacco products. Well, that's now the law of New York State. If they're a pharmacy, an in-store pharmacy, no more tobacco products. Ended the sale of flavored vapor products that lack an FDA marketing order. So unless it's been approved by the FDA, which none have been at this point, flavored vaping products, they can't be sold in New York State. And any flavor, and it includes menthol, and it allows the sale of those with tobacco flavor. So right now, as of May 18th, you shouldn't be seeing any flavored e-liquids out there for sale in New York State. As of July 1st, they're going to have to start disclosing product ingredients, including byproducts and heavy metals, like I mentioned. Wholesale distributors are going to have to be registered. The legislature authorizes the Commissioner of Health to regulate harmful carrier oils and vapor products. That goes back to the whole EVALI crisis. It's going to stop the delivery of e-cigarettes and vapor products to private residences by, online sales on July 1st. Prohibit the exterior display of these products within 1,500 feet of school in our counties and 500 feet in New York City. And it's going to increase doubling the retailer penalties for tobacco control sales violations for those ATUPA checks that are done by the local county departments of health. It's actually going to double the penalties that they can impose on places that sell to minors. And that's now including e-liquids and anybody below the age of 21. So really, I think I got right on the money here as far as time. Sorry, I had to rush a little bit, but if you have any questions, I'm available.
All righty, let me take a look here. We do have one in the question and answer box. Do you have any information on impact of vaping dry tobacco products? People that would otherwise roll their own cigarettes with just the leaves, but pack the tobacco into a vaporizer that can be used with a dry product.
Actually, no, I don't. There is some testing that's been going on because the tobacco industry right now has actually been wanting to introduce what's called heat not burn, where dried tobacco products are heated, but they're not burned, and the vapor that comes off those heated leaves, that's being studied, and they're submitting results currently. What I have seen has shown that there's not much of an improvement over what you would get from combusting tobacco. There's maybe a little bit of a difference, but there've been limited studies out there. It's still a work in process, but there's been less benefit than I think they expected to see. But they're still going to try to market that as a harm reduction product. Good luck.
And let's see, I think we do have one quick one here in the chat, and then we'll turn it back over. You said refillable cartridges are exempt from the flavor law. I thought you mentioned that you could no longer do refillable vape products. Looking for some clarification.
Okay. There's a difference between FDA and New York State. If we go, let me see. Yeah, New York State. In New York State, basically all flavored products are no longer allowed to be sold other than just tobacco flavor. The FDA did exempt the way they work it, cartridges, yeah, open tank systems that can be refilled are allowable in other states that don't have, more restrictive regulations like New York now does. So the only thing that really got impacted by the FDA legislation in the rest of the country was closed cartridges that were not refillable cartridges, but disposable cartridges that would plug into a device like Juul. It really was just a very small niche. It wasn't anywhere near as extensive as what we would have liked to have seen, which is why New York State went further.
Gotcha. All right, well, thank you so much for that clarification. I do see one more in the question and answer box, but we'll see maybe, Ken, if we can have you do that by sending a typed answer. That way we can set things up for some of our closing remarks. Thank you again for presenting with us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Mel.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Ken, for that presentation. A lot of people don't know what the risks are associated with vaping. And there was a question that I perhaps, Ken, if you're still on, I would think this is a good question to ask. Somebody mentioned that they have a 16-year-old that is using the vape pen, but only using the flavoring. Is there any chance you can talk to that and just the risks associated?
Well, that can happen. I mean, there is liquid out there that doesn't have nicotine, supposedly, but we've actually had labs test a lot of these nicotine-less vaping liquids, and they found that most of them still have nicotine in them because they're basically lying. It's possible, but if the flavors themselves, as I mentioned, they're a problem because those flavors are made up of many different chemicals, and those chemicals are heated, and the byproduct of the vaporized chemical is then going into the person's body. So absolutely, they're not risk-free. We have no way of knowing, what the degree of risk is at this point. And most kids, honestly, will tell their parents they're not vaping nicotine. They'll lie about it, and the parent has no way of knowing unless they actually see the actual juice or can analyze it. So most kids they found are vaping nicotine. Many are saying they're not, and some don't know they are, but there's a little deceit going on there.
All right, thanks, Ken, for responding to that question. I'm going to turn it over to Annie Rosenthal, but just real quickly, I want to mention I'm going to put the survey in there if you are hopping off, but please stay for closing remarks, which Annie will introduce right now, and we'll put the survey and the shared folder in the chat box again. Thanks again, Ken.
Thanks, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thanks for attending today. My name is Annie Rosenthal. I'm the Public Relations Coordinator for the Chautauqua County Department of Mental Hygiene. It's my extreme pleasure to introduce the speakers for the closing session for today's conference. Ms. Dean Pennington is Interim Clinic Director of the Dunkirk Mental Hygiene Clinic. She is also a Mental Hygiene Program Coordinator and the Chair of the Countywide Alliance for Enforcement and Rehabilitation, or CARE initiative. She will be presenting along with Steve Kilborn. He is Grants Project Director at the Chautauqua County Department of Mental Hygiene. Thank you, Misty and Steve.
Thank you, Annie. And again, thanks to everyone as I pull up my screen there. Well, what a conference today. I'm guessing that many of you who have participated have, like me, been to conferences, perhaps national conferences, regional conferences, places that you and I have, or our employers have paid money, and we've traveled long distances to attend. And I can say I have never attended one that has exceeded what we have benefited from today. So what a terrific conference this has been. And hats off to all who have worked so hard, and to the presenters. You know, we have had here in our own county, and again, I'm showing off, not me, but the county, we have had national, state, and local leaders actively participating in the conference today. And I think in some ways even more so, we've benefited from the local providers who have brought their knowledge and their professionalism and their passion to us today. I do think of Ann Haslett's remarks that even from her vantage point there at the national level and her travels around the country, that she has seen something special about Chautauqua County. And I think we have seen evidence of that here today. So I have particularly enjoyed this conference today. I trust that's true for many of you. I'm going to echo Melanie's comments to please do fill out the evaluation. But even while I'm talking, for your own sake, as well as ours, and maybe there are many things that you're going to take away from today, but would you put in the chat box just one thing that you really were struck with? about the conference today. Go ahead and put that in there and just, I hope, reinforce what I am experiencing myself today. A really terrific conference. And not just a terrific conference, but a real demonstration of what we have here in Chautauqua County. Well, amongst the many benefits, or what shall we say, advantages of this conference, even vis-a-vis larger and supposedly, you know, more nationally recognized conferences, we're also going to end early. So we're extra special here, I think. I just want to say a couple of things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Misty Pennington to also offer some closing remarks. But I want to leave us, again, with a real strong sense of how much this county has to offer. Again, I think today's conference has really been a demonstration of what we have going on here. And it's not to be taken for granted. And it is something to celebrate, and even more so, and I know I said much of this earlier in the Fred talk, but to project into our county and into our community. We really do carry a message of hope and healing. And the culture that we have the opportunity to influence in that regard is so important, alongside of all of the resources and the hard work of the various agencies and people. We want the community to know what is available here and what really special things we have in Chautauqua County. As Melanie has said, there is a resources folder, which you'll have a link to the access for. I want to just take this opportunity to, again, reinforce a particular resource that I hope you will take advantage of, as well as encourage others to take advantage of. CombatAddictionCHQ.com is a kind of one-stop shop, if you will, for information about prevention, treatment, recovery, harm reduction, and support for families. And really practical as well, as far as finding out where those services can be accessed. If you give us just a couple more minutes, I want to play for us a video here that kind of brings home what this website is all about. One of the identified struggles that people, whether themselves struggling with a substance use disorder or family members, have had is finding good information about addiction and finding the path to get help. Help is available.
The Combat Addiction CAHQ pulls together in one place the resources that are available for prevention and recovery and treatment.
Combat Addiction CHQ has all kinds of important information about where to go to get help, how to get appointments quickly, all the resources in our community, tidbits about how to engage a loved one in moving toward treatment.
Access all the recovery and treatment and prevention services and harm reduction services that are in Chautauqua County.
It has everything that is needed to guide people in the right direction in order to get the help that they need when they're ready to get it. And for those who aren't ready, and for families of individuals who maybe aren't ready, I think it is such a great resource in that it offers so much education and information to kind of help them navigate the sometimes uncertain and just strange waters of addiction.
It's just a wealth of information.
We have wanted to create and have a kind of one-stop website, both to provide information about addiction in general, but also some of the particulars about where help can be found right here in Chautauqua County, in this region, and how to go about accessing it.
Being able to see all the different resources that are there for you, it's like, wow. You know, some of them I don't even know about. You know, I'm still learning a lot of things. It's a lot to take in, but you know, being able to navigate it, it's easy to navigate, and it's fantastic.
I just feel that that is a huge asset to our community, and I see so many great things for that project. I see it growing and expanding and just really reaching its full potential.
We urge folks to have a look at combataddictionchq.com. Well, we do urge folks to have a look at combataddictionchq.com. The website, if you'll go to it, will appear like this. And as I said, amongst its other features is this chemical dependency services locator. This is a searchable database of providers right here in Chautauqua County, but also in some of our neighboring regions as well. We want to take the mystery out of what it takes to get services, especially in light of the fact that we are indeed so rich in services in so many ways, especially for a rural county. Well, I guess my final closing remark is just simply to say that I'm really proud to be able and happy to be able to work alongside and partner with so many terrific folks here in this county. And today, I think, has just really underscored what a special place this really is. Well, with that, let me turn over the mic, as it were, to Misty Pennington.
Hello, everyone. Just very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to assist Steve with doing the closing remarks, and I know that you have all had a very long day, and you're probably all tired and eager to get back to your lives. And I want to say thank you for attending today's conference. It's something that we're all very proud of, and a lot of collaboration went into this project. And I couldn't be more prouder of all of the partnerships and the hard work and dedication that went into this. Just want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors, the Chautauqua Center and True Talks Laboratories, as well as all of our planning partners, Chautauqua County Department of Mental Hygiene, Mental Health Association in Chautauqua County, Evergreen Health, Prevention Works, Hope Chautauqua, SUNY Fredonia, Chautauqua Tapestry, Tobacco Free CCA, the Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services, the Community Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and our very own Combat Addiction CHQ. I really hope that you enjoyed the little video that Steve just showed, something also that I'm extremely proud of. And I really hope that everyone uses it. It's a fabulous resource, and we're really hoping that it can help save lives. So please just make sure that you check out all of our different social media pages to get more information and find other ways to get help, or to get help for the people you care about. And again, just a big thank you to all of the speakers and presenters today, as well as all of you that took the time out of your busy lives to attend. Thank you so much.